As I see from the panel objectives, it is more theoretical one to see, experts should tell us the right approaches to analyze this security implications for our region, but also I hope we'll have some interesting discussions due to your questions. I propose to have 10-minute speeches to collect questions and to answer after all the speakers finished. And to warm up a bit of atmosphere, to prepare for speeches, I propose to the speakers all one of the questions to think about and maybe to answer at the end. To see what are the main factors that influence energy policy of our decision makers. It is commerciality of the projects, it is geopolitics that's count, or it is something else when this project discussion starts. Because we have very interesting situation of some very interesting cases when the countries took decisions that are not so logical, from commercial point of view, or that are purely geopolitical. I would not mention because you know all of these cases. Or you had a very interesting case when, originally in the case of Republic of Moldova, when the country was proposed a very big discount for gas from Russian side, just not to join the energy community. Unfortunately, they didn't accept that deal. So we have the very interesting cases when pipelines are passing through some countries, even if it is not commercially valid. If Nagorno-Karabakh would not exist, maybe we'll have another setup of pipelines here. Or if Abkhazians and South Ossetian conflicts won't exist, we'll not have maybe Blue Stream or other projects. So it is very interesting to see all this pipeline setup. Analyzing this through the perspective of these geopolitical factors. So let's start with the first speaker, Mr. Bakhtian Aslambeli, professor of Baku State University, and very good speaker. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's always a pleasure to be back in Tbilisi, and it's a great pleasure and honor to join that conference. So before I start, let me just introduce myself, start with a small disclaimer. I'm a professor of Baku State University and also adjunct faculty of ADA University. I do have some other affiliations with other institutions, but today's speech, today's presentation is made purely on my independent individual capacity and should not be linked to as a position of any institution I'm representing or affiliated with. So we're going to talk about the critical energy infrastructure. We talked, the colleagues yesterday talked about it, and I'll try to make a case of region, to make the case of the critical energy infrastructure of Azerbaijan and Georgia in the region, and talk about how safe this infrastructure is, and what are the threats to that infrastructure, and how we can address those potential threats. So first of all, when we talk about potential energy infrastructure, unfortunately, most of the experts, they link that terminology to the pipelines only. So it's not just about the protection of the pipelines. It's actually protection of the entire infrastructure. Would that be the platform into the sea? Would that be pumping station? Would that be a valve station? Would that be an administration building, etc., etc.? So the energy infrastructure is actually any single element of the entire infrastructure, starting from the single platform into the sea, would continue to the subsea pipelines, terminal, and up until the final delivery point. And one peculiarity of the energy infrastructure, why the energy infrastructure is so attractive for the terrorists, is that you don't need to blow out the entire platform. You can destroy a small element of the infrastructure, and the entire infrastructure will stop. You don't need to destroy the great platform in the middle of the Caspian Sea. If you just destroy the small valve station somewhere in Georgia or somewhere in Turkey, the entire system will stop. Because if the pipeline stops, you can't export further, and if you can't export, you can't produce. That's simple. And today, in our current life, in the contemporary period, most of that infrastructure are managed by electronically. So you don't need physically blow out the pipeline or the valve station. You can make a cyber attack. By sitting on your machine, by making cyber attack, you can blow out the pipeline. So it's not about the physical security, it's also about the cyber security as well. Now, the colleagues yesterday talked a lot about the regional projects, talked a lot about the BTC Pipeline connecting Caspian to the Mediterranean, which brings actually 1% of the global oil production from Caspian to Mediterranean. Now the question is, how safe the pipeline is, how safe the infrastructure is. We had a number of the attacks so far during the past 20 years in the region. We had a first attack to the pipeline in 1998 on the northern route, Baku-Novorossiysk pipeline. We had a number of the small attacks, attempts actually in Georgian territory. We had a major valve station explosion in Turkey, 2008 August, accidentally, just one day before Russian invasion to Georgia. So you make your own calculations. And this is the kind of this is the valve station, small valve station in the middle of the Turkey, close to the, I think the East Turkey. And this is what remained after that, right? And what happened by just destroying that small valve station, the entire pipeline, the whole pipeline stopped. That easy. And when this happened, the security forces in Turkey had nothing to do but just to make a memory photograph in front of the blowout. So, in order not to allow this happen, with again, always the regional states, they're getting together with the Ministry of Defenses, and yesterday, I think, Eugene talked about it, the joint meetings of the MODs of the region. They had some joint operations with the Turkey and Azerbaijan military, joint trainings actually, sorry, not operations, joint trainings, etc. But the real question is the new project, Southern Gas Corridor, which consists of actually 3 pipelines, SCP, TANAP, and TAP, is safe enough? So I'll come back to that question. Let me make the case about the importance of the Southern Gas Corridor. The colleagues from SOCAR and BP talked yesterday that this pipeline will bring about 10 billion cubic meter to Europe. And 10 billion cubic meter is about 2% of around 2% of Europe's consumption. So you can say this is a drop in the ocean. I would say it is not a drop, but the drop. Why I'm thinking so? So the importance of the network is not about that 10 BCMA. The network would be the first ever infrastructure that would bring non-Russian gas from the Caspian to the Europe. At the moment, Europe is heavily depending on the 3 sources, North Sea, North Africa, Russia. And that infrastructure, if it's built on time, that would serve not only for bringing Azeri gas from Shah Deniz, some other sources from Azerbaijan, the potential or the theoretical possibility for Turkmen gas to join that infrastructure. There's a possibility for Iranian gas to go join that infrastructure, possibility of North Iraqi gas to join the infrastructure. So the importance of the Southern Gas Corridor shall not be limited to 10 BCMA from Azerbaijan. The real importance of the infrastructure is actually that would be brand new infrastructure that could serve for further decreasing of Europe's dependence from Russian supplies. That's the ultimate goal. And yesterday, a colleague of mine from SAM, Gulmira Rzayeva, she named the number $12.2 billion that Azerbaijan is going to invest to that pipeline, among other parties. And 12.2 billion, just Azerbaijan's portion. I would like to make some small clarification. This is the immediate investment to be made before 2020. The ultimate investment of the Azerbaijan will be between 15 to 20 billion. For those experts who are familiar with the production sharing agreements, how the oil agreements are working, there's a profit oil element and a cost oil element. The part of the investment the IOCs, international oil companies, will be investing from between now and 2020, part of them will be paid back to those investors by the state. So ultimately, the final bill for Azerbaijan will be actually more than 12.2 billion, and a different calculation, something somewhere between 15 and 20 billion. Now the question is, why you spending in this current economic circumstances something about 15 billion to take your gas to Europe, while you could sell it easily to your immediate neighbors, Russia and Turkey. Doesn't matter, you love them or not. Just business. But if you look from the geopolitical aspect, the country took some undertaking actually to come up with that project. And there is a certain commitment from European parties as well to support that project. Now the question is, to what extent the project is safe? To what extent that the critical infrastructure, and it is indeed critical infrastructure, not only for Azerbaijan and Georgia, but for also the consumers in Europe. To what extent that critical energy infrastructure guaranteed from the potential threats, guaranteed from potential attacks? What are the security systems that could defend them? Unfortunately, with the current circumstances, there's not much. We cannot really rely on the security system of CST, a collective security treaty organization led by lovely neighbor in the north. We do have a kind of the war situation with another neighbor in the west, Armenia. And by the way, in October 2012, Armenian army had a military training on how to attack pipeline. I've seen there's some other trainings, how to defend pipeline. That was the first one, the training how to attack pipeline. And you shouldn't be a regional expert to guess which pipeline they trained to attack, right? And talking about the importance of the Southern Gas Corridor, obviously the whole infrastructure is made for decreasing the Europe's dependence from the Russian import, and that's known to Russia as well. What if there will be some provocations to the pipeline? That could easily be in Azerbaijan or in Georgia. In Azerbaijan is even easier. There's a conflict, Nagorno-Karabakh conflict in the country. Russia could easily motivate Armenia to start to activate the military actions, and that would be a great face saving for Russia. They are not party of the conflict. They even may act as a peacekeeper, even may bring the peacekeeping forces, etc., etc., and that would kill actually the entire project, or the situation in Turkey, etc. So coming back, and the real thing is, I mean, let me talk about that as well, please. I mean, every time we have certain conflicts, in the 2008 in Georgia, 2014 in Ukraine, so the first reaction of most of the Western institutions, they actually come up and say they're really concerned about that. It's really helpful, being concerned about the situation when they actually already got the threat. I think it's time to, there is a joke, I'm at a NATO-sponsored conference, shouldn't say that, but there's a joke that NATO these days stands for not act, talk only. So let's move from that way. Let's think about what could be done in terms of the practical protection of the infrastructure that is actually for the great benefit of the neighbor countries as well. Obviously, I'm not talking about the Article 5 implications. Article 5, the military attack to one member should be considered as a military attack to all the members, and this is the cornerstone of the NATO. I'm not talking about that because neither Azerbaijan or Georgia are the NATO members yet, and boots on the ground will even more provocate, even more more higher level of controversy with Russia. The current relationship of Azerbaijan and Georgia with NATO is predominantly regulated by Article 4, which talks about the relationship with the partners and says in case of any conflict, in case of any threats, partner countries and NATO may have a consultations. And consultations means talking, and talking means expressing concern, which proved to be not really helpful so far in the past. So my proposal is actually we need something more than talking and less than boots on the ground, more than Article 4 and less than Article 5. And my proposal is come up with the so-called Article 4.5, which is in mid of these two concepts. Basically, without bringing boots on the ground, but having the extensive cooperation with the military training, with building the cyber shelter, with the exchange of the cybersecurity information, with the exchange of intelligence unit information, with the political support. These things could really increase level of the security protection of those critical energy infrastructure in the region. Again, this should be done in a very careful manner, not to increase the controversy with the lovely neighbor in the north, but in fact, without those activities, the level of the security and level of protection is really in a lower level. We need to increase that if we all are interested as a regional state or as a consumer state in other part of the pipeline in a successful completion of that project. I'll stop here. I'll thank you for your attention and ready to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Aslanbeyli, for inspired presentation. Nobody managed yet to change or to amend the Washington Treaty from 49, but still it is a chance to to discuss about, at least to see what we can do.
You never say never.
Yeah, sure. Now we would like to collect 2-3 questions. If you have any, please, sir. Present.
I have one question in regard of Azerbaijani and Russian relationships. When it comes to the Syrian conflict, I mean, we tracked quite a lot of movement for supply for the Syrian campaign through Azerbaijani airspace. Not only diplomat transport of Assad and other high-ranked officials, but also a quite significant amount of military equipment and fighter jets and so on. How would you assess the position of the Azerbaijan government in relation to the security of the pipeline when it comes to compromising with Russia in other topics?
Yeah, taken. Any other questions? No? Okay, maybe later on after this, when we move to the second speaker, to Dr. Gedrinos Chesnakas. Yeah, sorry if I misspell you. Professor at Vytautas Magnus University from Lithuania, with a presentation on the evolution of energy security policy, lesson learned from South Caucasus. Please.
Dear colleagues, it's my great pleasure to be here. And I must say that I will approach energy security a bit from the different angle that was basically presented in here for these last 2 days. This is my original research, based on my original research on energy security evolution in the Baltic states. I will not overview the evolution, but I will try to present the pitfalls or problems in regional energy cooperation Baltic states faced and the other states can avoid if they are successful in cooperation. I'm proud to say that Baltic states reached very high integration and increased their energy security from this last 25 years. However, this was a challenging approach. So basically what we had after post-Soviet, in the post-Soviet space, in geoenergetic structure, we had consumers on the top, Russian territory in the middle, and suppliers at the end or at the beginning. It depends from where we look. And this was increasing Russia's position, strengthening towards suppliers as well as consumers, playing them, with paying lower prices, asking for higher prices, and so on and so on. Now, this is the wishful geoenergetic structure in post-Soviet space. Consumers have multiple suppliers, while suppliers have multiple areas where to supply. And the Russian territory remains, no one denies it. However, it is not of a strategic importance in the long term. And we can observe that in the post-Soviet space we had two types of countries that approached, the countries approached in two types to energy security. First, there was countries that wished to diversify, and the Baltic states can be mentioned among them. In the short term period, they had threats, they had disruptions, they had price jumps. While in the longer term perspective, they approached the market, they made the market reforms, they decreased dependency on the sole supplier, they decreased economical and political influence of the supplier. On the other hand, we have other countries, I don't want to mention them by title, but we can relate to them, that were not eager to diversify supplies. Because of the lower prices and Russia's closer approach to them, they experienced increased competitiveness because of lower gas, oil prices. The price stability was higher, as well as the supply stability in initial period. However, in the long term, the vulnerability of those countries increased, and as well as political and as well as economical and political influences of Russia, which in some later led to the conflicts, energy conflicts, Ukraine, Belarus, other countries. This did not allow for the countries to make reforms in energy and economic infrastructure, because they remained high energy intensive industries which they no longer be able to sustain. And basically they did not include or presented market approach in for some reasons this doesn't show correct. Okay, I think I have difficulties with this slideshow. Unfortunately, if you could help me a bit. It's just, yeah. Okay, thank you. So the challenges in ensuring energy security in the Baltic states. We had two types of challenges. First, domestic, and they are corruption. This I would call a latent challenge, because we have cases when we can identify when corruption worked against energy security projects or energy security as a whole. However, in the perspective, we cannot, there is a hidden importance or a hidden effect of corruption to energy security projects and implementation on that. We have lack of competencies. If we would look into the political environment of the Baltic states, we can see that only in Lithuania we have energy Ministry of Energy, which led to the efficient implementation of most of energy security projects. In Estonia, in Latvia, we don't have any kind of this stronger institutional element. And even in the Latvia and Estonia, we don't have in the parliament groups for energy. So this shows that those countries has a weaker approach to energy security when dealing with the implementation of projects. Then we have a politicization of energy projects. And I cannot stress this enough, how important it is. Because the energy projects usually take not one term of the government. It usually takes 2-3 terms of the governments, changes in the parliament, changes in the governments. And if we don't have sustainable agreement between the political parties of the country, we will not be able to implement energy security projects. Because when each party changes, when new government is formed, each of them have different approach to energy security projects. Maybe those projects remain in essence the same, however, the implementation is different, they choose different companies, different groups, so we start from once again, and this prolongs implementation. And for this reason, there is a need for the agreement of political parties, political powers in the countries to move with the energy security project. The self-strengthening discourse, this might sound a bit strange, but when I did the research, I had many interviews with members of political parties, members of government. And what I found out that they live in a bubble. They live in the bubble concerning that they assume that, for example, that what social democrats say or do in energy security is absolutely perfect, while what conservatives do or suggest in energy security is absolutely politicized and it's wrong approaches. And this enhances or strengthens this opposition of political parties, because most of the information by the members of the parliament are received from the government, which is formed by, of course, the dominant parties. So we see that this accumulates how the energy security problems or projects are perceived, and this does not allow to look into changing environment and adjusting energy security projects to that environment, because there is no resource, or they are limited to look beyond what is stated by political parties, beyond what are interests to some extent of political parties. So we have to address this very strongly. Then we have regional challenges. And one of them is lack of understanding of regionality. If we look in all three Baltic states, each state approach to energy security mostly on individual level or state level. They still lack cooperation as a regional unit, understanding that the development of particular energy project in one country might lead to strengthening of energy security in other country, and that you don't need to duplicate projects, you don't need to create excessive infrastructure in order to achieve energy security. Then there is, of course, domination of self-help. This is the individual thinking and the lack of approach between them. The other is suspicion. Suspicion that the project development in other country will not give enough security for your country. Here I would like to go to the example of Latvia and LNG terminal in Latvia. The regional LNG terminal in the Baltic states was planned to construct in Latvia because it has gas storage facilities, it's natural. However, Lithuanians as well as Estonians did not, or assumed, I would say, that LNG terminal would be able to act in the interest of dominant company in Latvia natural gas sector, Gazprom. For these reasons, Lithuania, seeing that it's difficult to agree with the partners, moved on its own. And if we look in still existing positions of other Baltic states, they still have plans, or at least they say they still have plans to construct LNG terminals. But this would be excessive infrastructure, because basically Klaipėda LNG terminal is able to supply gas for the region, and there is no need for additional. So even if we look even between Finland and Estonia, they plan to cooperate very strongly in natural gas sector. However, each of them see as LNG to construct in their own territories, not sharing. And so this suspicion is quite strong. We and the countries have to address this. Traps of small decision or small gains. I recall that yesterday the representative of Ministry of Energy, I think of Georgia, said that we know the strategic goals, strategic infrastructure, strategic projects we have to construct. The interesting thing is, however, that usually those projects fall in so-called small gains traps, because when you have a regional cooperation, countries tend to play one another, because when you are the last agreeing to the project, you can negotiate, you can increase your negotiation power and receive something more to add in some energy project or somewhere in the infrastructure. And so usually, or not usually, but sometimes, these small gain decisions undermine the implementation of big projects. Now, the institution that allowed to address these issues was or is European Union, basically because it acted or allowed for the countries to find agreements. The challenges by the European Union presented in greenhouse gas emission regulations, of course, was seen as a challenge for the countries. However, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia were successful in increasing domestic renewable sector and decreasing imports and need for hydrocarbons from Russia, mostly at that time. And so this will continue in the future, not only in the Baltic states. If you look in the strategic documents of European Union, there is objectives to decrease consumption of hydrocarbons. And so because these renewables are domestic, this will lead to the increasing security of those countries, because you can control the domestic production. It's much easier. Then political and financial support is very important. My good colleague Arūnas Molis already yesterday mentioned the importance of Baltic Energy Market Interconnection Plan, or BEMIP, which has strong influence and effect on increasing energy security of the Baltic states. Financial support, political support is very crucial. The European Union acted as mediator between the Baltic states in order, when they failed to find agreement between themselves. And this was very important in implementing energy security projects. Sometimes countries fail to communicate one another. And the importance of European Union involvement actually allowed to move further with that. So this is a very important role. Then, of course, European Union and NATO allows for the Baltic states to internalize energy security problems, to construct the discourse of energy security problems in NATO, in European Union, and for this reason to receive greater attention and continue to have political and financial support to deal with energy threats in the region or outside the region. So these are the problems that regions faced, and these are how they dealt with. So I would underline the importance of international organizations and the need to find the closer cooperation that takes time and effort in order to increase energy security of the region, to start thinking not on the individual cases, whether it's Georgia, it's Azerbaijan, but to think in the regional context, what can be achieved for regional energy security. Thank you very much.
Thank you indeed for your presentation. Very good to hear, to listen for the Baltic states example. And please, questions to our speaker. Please, sir.
Well, thank you for the great presentation. In the context of the Southern Caucasus, where do you see the major bottlenecks for regional cooperation apart from geopolitics? Is there also other issues like commercial problems or governance challenges that are preventing some cooperation from happening? Thanks.
Okay. Any other? We just collect an answer after. Any other question? I have one. If you can explain us, if reference to Lithuanian LNG terminal, what would be the lesson for Black Sea states? I mean, it was a challenger. I mean, what benefits it brought, what expenses, of course, what investments it suppose. So how do you see, I mean, this, if you compare these two cases, Black Sea and the Baltic Sea? Any other question? No? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question.
We'll answer after all speakers finish, yeah?
Okay.
During discussion.
Okay,
Thank you. So let's move to the next speaker, to Dr. Murman Marvelashvili, Professor of Ilia State University and Director of Old Experience of Georgia. If speech presentation on systems approach to energy security and implications for policymakers. Please,
thank you very much. I would like to thank the previous speakers because they streamlined partly what I wanted to say. I will not be talking about much of maths or energy security. I wanted to emphasize one thing, and I'll try to be brief too. I wanted to emphasize one thing, that once we are talking about energy security of the countries, energy security of southern gas corridors and energy flows over Georgia and South Caucasus, we are talking about independent energy flows. Energy flows very well through Russian territory to Europe, but there is a political cost to it, which Europe doesn't want to pay, and also the countries that are now transiting the energy, like Ukraine or even Belarus, they don't want to pay the political price for that, for being the intermediary. So it's about independence of political will, independence of political influence, and it is about competition and commercial energy supplies. So therefore, I want to lead to the point that it is about independence of our countries that is valuable in this whole thing. It is independence for external influences, of political influences, and that is one very important component in once we are talking about the energy flows over South Caucasus. Then a simple truth that the chain is as strong as its weakest link, right? So that's we can be talking about infrastructure, we can be talking about protection from a lot of different threats, but if we do not take a complex view of the energy security, then we are likely to lose the focus and lose the main thing, which is this independence of energy flows. I'm leading to the definition of energy security that we are trying to promote here in Georgia and internally, and this is pictured in this slide, indicating that energy security is a part only of national security, and it is according to Georgia's security concept. Oh, it doesn't. Oh, sorry. Why don't you? Then I'll have to show you this link again. So I was talking about this chain and this link. And according to Georgia's security concept, there are values like independence, freedom, territorial integrity, and so on, democracy. And there are interests, and energy security is one of the interests. And interests also are European and Euro-Atlantic integration. Interest is economic sustainable development. Interest is environment protection and so on. So energy security should sustain all the rest. Energy security should be a component and it should not be achieved at cost of any of the others. This is what we're trying to indicate quite often once there is attempt of developing of hydropower without any reasonable consideration of environmental consequences, of security, of social consequences, and economic consequences as well. To be short, energy security, again, quite often we are looking at the positives of energy security. Like politicians like to say, we have diversified, we have done this, and they show it to us as a guarantee of energy security. But the energy security is not just what you did, but it is mostly what you didn't. So if you have, well, can I call somebody? Oh, okay. So if you have this towers and this castle, and if you see only part of it that politicians want to show you, you assume that it is like this, that it is a full castle, but it can be something like this. So therefore we need to take care of all the system of this energy security and all components. Otherwise the main goal of being, of having secure system serving the nation, and I would say the previous presentations make a very good case for regional security as well, so we will not achieve that. And a few examples of threats, just physical threats. This is a case of landslide in in Caucasus Pipeline when we had it in 2014. It ruptured the main pipeline coming from Georgia, from Russia to Armenia, which supplies Armenia with most of its natural gas. These are the examples of 2006, when the pipeline was blown up together with the transmission line. This is not the real photo, it just indicates the tower that has been blown up at the same time in the very cold winter period, most cold time in some 10 years. So why it was done? It was done not because somebody wanted us to freeze and to be without light. It was done because they wanted us to change our political direction, to change our to give up on independence, on democracy possibly, and so on. This is the picture of 2008, where when it was a demonstrative bombing of the route next to Western Route export pipeline. The one that we were talking about is now 1 kilometer controlled by Russian troops. And explosion in Turkey. So all these physical threats are on their part. Another feature of energy security that we like to underline is seasonality. You should account for the most difficult period, for winter period, and that defines your security. Like we are dependent 65% on external energy supply, and mostly it is gas, but we are also electricity dependent and pretty strong in winter period if you are looking at time. So in winter our hydropower does not supply enough, and we have to ramp up our thermal power plants and also to import. And that is the critical period where we are more vulnerable. The same is about gas, because gas supply is increasing 4 times about in winter period. Therefore, once analyzing energy security, we should have this kind of seasonal indices that define our energy security in most vulnerable period. And sum up, well, there are different risks to security: quality of supply, stability of supply, availability, and then you have impact of that interruption, then you have type that defines, and duration. And taking into account all these factors should be a part of systemic approach to energy security. And one very important thing, a need for a long-term strategy. Yesterday there was a discussion of electricity transmission system and its development plans. We are intensively developing electricity transmission system, but we do not have energy strategy in the country. That is actually a big threat once you don't have a strategy and you are doing certain things. And we are looking at increasing the capacity of transmission enormously, especially north to south. And there is a question whether this north-south increase is the highest interest of country or even of the region. Whether it can be accommodated in a way that it doesn't contradict east-west direction, and necessarily precautions have to be taken in order that we guarantee that one direction does not contradict with the other. And there are the main factors of energy security risk, I would say, are soft power, soft factors. This is transparency and governance. This is qualification of specialists. This is quality of governance and planning. And those things need to be addressed at the highest possible level, because all other things will follow. The physical security will follow, economic security will follow. And I would like to repeat what was emphasized and indicated, that there may be big regional gains that we are not duly exploring yet. So I would like to invite the participants to, in future, to think more about how we can find and explore and then utilize the synergies of interest that we have in our countries in energy security. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Maglashvili. Very interesting presentations. You've seen the layers, the dimension of energy security, and especially in the case of Georgia, how it applies. So if you have any questions, please feel free to address now. Early morning, please, sir. Early morning is much difficult.
Thank you for the presentation. I have a question about how do you see energy infrastructure development without threatening the environment, or how do you see, how can we minimize these threats? Thanks.
Well,
we will answer later on. Just let's collect.
Yeah, okay.
You can write. Any other question? I have one, if you allow me. So, based on your presentation, especially the last slide, which I could not read exactly, but also based on your experience in Georgia, what would be the main, let's say, 2-3 recommendation for the government of Georgia to increase energy security of Georgia? I mean, in terms of gas and electricity as well. So, two main, three things.
Thank you. So
let's leave for discussions. Yeah. At the end of, after all speakers.
okay.
Yeah. So
I will just answer this, and others very difficult. This first is a principle of sustainable development, and you have to consider all factors, including environment, economic, and security factor, and social factor as well. And you have to involve stakeholders, and you have to do it. It's a process that needs to be conducted in a proper way, and the result will be the best possible. You cannot build any infrastructure without damaging the environment, but it should be done in a sustainable way.
Thank you so much. Because time is pressing, let's move to our next speaker. This is Liana Zhervalidze, independent energy and policy analyst, Georgia. And the topic, as I see here, impact of low prices on production, export, and security of energy resources.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everybody. I will be talking about price collapse and implications on the region. But before starting my presentation and going through it slide by slide, thank you. I would like to mention that three factors have been defining modern international gas market, having direct implications on the region. And these three factors are global warming, saying that we have to reduce the use of coal and oil and use more gas, suggesting that we better use more gas as more environmentally friendly source of energy. So, reduction of coal and oil opens the road, the path for increased use of gas. The second is Fukushima accident, which made countries suspicious about building new nuclear power stations, and again opened the road, the path for the use of more gas in electricity generation. And the third is the US shale revolution, which started in 2009 and led to the collapse of prices on oil and gas. And US is becoming self-sufficient very shortly and is becoming an exporter of oil and gas. So number one, economic and military superpower is becoming an exporter of energy and potentially setting the rules of the play on international energy market. And all this, of course, may have already and may have further implications on the region. So the Caspian gas is expected. There is a path open for the Caspian gas. I mean mostly Turkmen gas and Iranian gas to international markets, but at the same time, price environment is not beneficial. We have collapse of price on both oil and gas, and these projects, I mean gas production projects, apart from Shah Deniz 2, are behind the schedule, and we have no vibrant development in this regard. Geopolitics also have worsened in the region. We have proxy war in Syria and Iraq threatening Turkey. I hope Turkey will remain stable and reliable transit country. Instability in Afghanistan and the threat of radical Islamism, of course, poses serious threat to Eastern Caspian countries. So, the Caspian gas is expected to exceed to international markets in low price environment and with severe deterioration of geopolitical situation in the region at the immediate borders of producing area and transit area. These are my conclusions, and I try just to go ahead and go back to Rado's question about paying attention to economics and geopolitics of energy in the region. So, if economics let play for Turkmen Iranian gas, this gas for the European market, because we are talking about the market in the West, so this gas will never reach, including deep water Azerbaijani gas apart from Shah Deniz 2. This gas will never reach the European market because economics is not good. Georgia's transit position weakens, so does its income from the transit. So Georgia's income from the transit is volume-based. So if lesser transit, so we have no income from this transit. The role of China and Russia increases in the region. Why? Because China is the #1 investor in Central Asia, and Russia is the only country, military power at the immediate border of this region. Security threats coming from the south and east Caspian and why the Middle East will strengthen rather than lessen the positions of Russia in the region as a sole military force in the region. I'm sorry. Or the entire region falls into turmoil. I'm sorry again. So now I would like to go to the content of my presentation. So we have a low price environment and a heavily degraded geopolitical situation in the region. Partial opening of Iran, opening north-south axis of transportation, war in Syria and Iraq, Russia-Turkey rapprochement, which means that we move energy hub from Ukraine to Turkey, with all these threats coming from the south of Turkey. Gas and in this situation, gas from the Caspian is shall have to compete with traditional suppliers to the European market, like Russia, Norway, and Algeria, as well as new potential suppliers like gas from Eastern Mediterranean and potentially Northern Iraq, or US shale LNG. All these are old and new competitors to the gas, Turkmen and Iranian gas on the European market. What we have in the market? The market says, okay, we are oversupplied, we are overcontracted, we look for low price environment, and you have to comply, all suppliers have to comply with third energy package and anti-monopoly legislation if you want to accede to our market. This is what the market says in the European Union. So, what we have on the market again, low price environment, and the European market looking for even lower prices, because there is still difference between between the gas and power price in the European Union and the US, because gas price in US at Henry Hub is 2.8, while the European Union is about between 5 and 6 per million BTU. So there is still difference, and the European Union would like to have cheap gas, not expensive. In these circumstances, what is the major factor? Geopolitics or commerciality? Russia supplies unprecedented volumes of gas to the European Union. Yesterday, I follow very closely what Russian TV is saying, because Russia is a serious threat and we need to know what's going on there. So yesterday Putin said in 2016, Russia has been supplying 600 million cubic meters of gas to the European Union. Unprecedented volumes. And LNG takes only 50% of the European market, although regasification terminals allow, if loaded at full capacity, to receive 39% of all imports, to meet 39% of all imports. Competitors to Turkmen and Iranian gas, existing supply routes, it's these all-known and well-known routes across Russia, Norway pipelines and Algeria pipelines and LNG. New supply routes, the Caspian, we supply new resources and through different new routes. But this is only limited. These are only limited volumes. Northern Iraqi gas, 10 BCM, going higher, as high as 20 BCM per annum, but because of the war and instability in southeastern part of Turkey, there are question marks whether this gas will reach the market at all. East Mediterranean, Israeli, Egypt interests of Turkey cannot be underestimated in pipeline, otherwise LNG or US shale LNG. So all these are new supply sources and routes, and they compete with the Caspian gas. Next. Japanese gas is not expensive. It's not, cheap. Yesterday, Gulmira mentioned that only production and transportation share in the project, Azerbaijani share in the project is $12.5 billion, while investment commitments of SOCAR in Turkey go up to 17 billion, about. And this in low price environment when nobody knows when these investments will be recovered. But Southern Corridor, if we're talking about somehow connecting with or linking with Turkmen gas, these costs do not take into the cost of Trans-Caspian or other infrastructure across Iran and coming from the south to the north and joining Southern Gas Corridor. So these are additional expenses to be calculated. Now, Eastern Mediterranean gas, the limitation problems with Turkey, with Syria, and I can't imagine how the limitation can be signed with Syria when the Russian military bases there, and Turkey. We don't see progress. There is a need for Cyprus solution first in order for a pipeline to be built. If not pipeline, then we have just one option. This is LNG, and LNG is not economically very competitive with Caspian gas. And volumes also, whatever we can say, even if Israeli and Cyprus gas reserves amount to 1 trillion, it's nothing, just nuts, if we compare these reserves with those of Iran and Turkmenistan. Now, northern Iraq, as I said, there is a war, proxy war, and instability, and we don't know whether it will happen at all and when, unless there is the end of the war and stability in the southeastern part of Turkey. New competitors again. This is Nord Stream 2, avoiding Ukraine, and taking altogether 100 BCM of Russian gas, including from Bovanenkovo field. Why I'm stressing on Bovanenkovo field? Because it's huge, and Russia started investing in this field in early 2000, and this gas is expected to be available from the next year. So investments have already been made, and gas is ready to reach the German market through the Nord Stream 2. So we are behind, and Russian infrastructure and pipeline and production is much ahead. US shale LNG, some optimistic scenarios said that US shale LNG can be as much as 60 million tons, which is about 70 billion cubic meters. And US started exporting LNG. Even Turkey has received recently. US LNG has already reached Brazil, Portugal, Turkey, maybe some other countries I don't remember, but these three for sure. Opportunities for producers in the Caspian in low price environment. So prices on oil and gas collapsed. At the same time, local currencies also collapsed, and the dollar has become more expensive. So imports of these countries have become more expensive. So the economic situation has deteriorated severely. Majors involved in the gas production in Azerbaijan and elsewhere, and service companies and state companies, all of them are in red zone, and they announce about cutting down the investment portfolios. So who will invest? Apart what already is being invested. Competition again, Azerbaijan, in high competition, when there is abundance of resources on the market, one would expect more competition between regional producers. Well, we don't see such competition, for example, between Azerbaijan and Russia. Azerbaijan, with 10 BCM of Shah-Deniz gas, is taking 8% of Russian gas on the European market if consumption remains flat. But the SOCAR is cooperating with Russian companies, and we don't see any serious competition in this regard. Recently, Azerbaijani SOCAR and the Russian company Rosneft agreed that SOCAR will treat Russian Rosneft oil in its Star refinery in Turkey. So Azerbaijan, with delivering additional 6 BCM of gas to the Turkish market, is taking almost 30% of Russian share on this market. But again, relation, we don't see big, first competition. They just talk to each other and agree on terms and cooperate. Competition and low price environment among producers in the Eastern Caspian. Here the situation is different. Russia prioritizes buying gas from loyal producers in the Caspian, not from everybody. In 2016, Gazprom has bought already 4 BCM from Uzbekistan, but 0 from Turkmenistan, because Turkmenistan is taking more independent stance vis-a-vis Russia, and Turkmenistan says it's neutral and doesn't join, and no intention of joining any economic or military union in the region. In 2016, Gazprom is buying the same volumes of gas from Kazakhstan, right? They are strategic partners and they are very close, and okay, we all know that. Iran is opening a north-south axis. More oil and gas exchange is possible through this axis. So just recently we've witnessed swaps among Azerbaijan, Iran, and Turkmenistan. So this opens opportunity for oil and gas swaps from the north to the south, and at the same time from the south to the north. Okay. Now, what we have in Europe, European companies have heavily invested in U.S. shale development. You see the companies involved in U.S. shale production. And in 2016, Panama Canal has been upgraded, is already upgraded. So shale oil and LNG from the U.S. can be taken elsewhere to the Western market, to Southeast Asia, so where the market conditions are better, where the prices are higher. As I said, so U.S. shale LNG is a new player and very serious player on the international market. But some American experts say that it can be competitive at $3 per million BTU at Henry Hub for the European market if delivered to the European market, but less competitive at higher than 5 per BTU. But the European majors who have already invested heavily in U.S. shale development will probably take some of this gas to their consumers to the European Union. So now I'm coming to my conclusions. Price collapse improved competitiveness of EU industries. However, it worsened opportunities to receive alternative gas from alternative routes. Why? Because it's expensive and it's behind the schedule. Other projects are ahead. At preliminary estimates, all new projects meant for delivering new gas to EU are quite expensive, as I said. Gas delivered through Nord Stream will be less expensive because Bovanenkovo field is already developed, and gas will be available starting 2017. This is what Gazprom says, and this is what is saying a report of the Oxford gas program. And this gas will be available at the German border at 3.5, and Gazprom is ready to take competition with US LNG and protect its market share on the European market. Southern Gas Corridor, as I said, is not cheap, won't be cheap. If now we are talking about $40 billion for producing and transportation of 16 BCM of gas from Shahdeniz 2. The price collapse limits maneuvering for producers in the Caspian, Iran, Turkmenistan to produce, build the infrastructure, and deliver cheap gas to EU. Obviously, it will be extremely difficult for them to compete with traditional, historical, and new suppliers on this market. Under market-driven conditions, historical new suppliers have to comply again to the market rules of the European Union, third energy package, and anti-monopoly legislation, and sometimes apply for exemption. And it's up to the Commission to give the exemption or to deny it, the exemption.
I'm sorry, 1 more minute, please.
So, just 1 minute, okay. Conclusion. Gas and oil transiting across Georgia remains limited, so does Georgia's income from transit. The transit position of Georgia, which is very close to me, therefore I'm reading this part of this slide. Position of Georgia, much anticipated for the years, weakens. Conclusion number 3, if low price environment maintained, gas demand and consumption expected to increase. Gas becomes more competitive vis-a-vis to coal and even sometimes to renewables. So the demand on gas will increase in the longer term. In this case, when gas demand will increase, Russian pipeline gas and US LNG will be prepared to meet this demand. In order to avoid the monopolization of EU market, huge gas resources of Iran and Turkmenistan need to be given due consideration and special treatment, in my understanding. And this is the last of my conclusions, and I hope that I'm wrong in this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very comprehensive presentation on the very good geopolitical overview of current setup and state of pipelines. So we are moving, as we are in delay, to next speaker, Dr. Esmina Jafarova, assistant professor of Ada University. You can speak from here if you don't have slides, just to, yeah. And I would apologize because Ms. Jafarova is leaving soon to airport. So if you have questions, we'll for Ms. Javerlidze, we'll address after that. Thank you, please.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor, and I'm pleased and honored to join this event, and also very saddened that I have to leave very early due to other arrangements. It wasn't really possible for me to stay longer. So unlike others, I don't have slides, so I will just try to focus selectively on my report and mostly talk about the Azerbaijan's role in fostering regional cooperation in the energy field, as well as the fostering regional cooperation in other infrastructure networks. So again, yesterday and today you've heard a lot of experts speak, a lot of issues that have been mostly covered. So it's really hard to be not repetitive when you're the last one who will speak on the topic. So I will try again to be brief and talk about the issues that haven't really been covered. So while the issue of energy security is increasingly occupying the agendas of global and regional security, so are the political, economic, and many other challenges associated with it. And each region is individual, and South Caucasus region is unique and intensely complex when it comes to ensuring the existing challenges that are translated into opportunities. And the pendulum is nudged towards cooperation versus competition. There are indeed rather rich cooperation patterns, and Azerbaijan's role obviously has been central in that regard. If to take a little excursion in history, Azerbaijan, having faced with existential threats to its security after acquiring its independence, has found an escape in opening the country's rich oil and gas reserves to international exploration and foreign direct investments that enabled the rejuvenation of the country's torn economy. The country has come a long way ever since, having weathered the hardships by the challenges of transition, as well as the burden on its economy by the large body of IDPs and refugee population in the aftermath of ongoing conflict with the neighboring country. So first of all, let me briefly focus on the positive cooperation patterns that are unfolding in the region and beyond the region of South Caucasus, in which Azerbaijan has extensively positive role. And those will be about the mostly transportation projects. So, located in the crossroads of east-west and north-south international transport corridors, Azerbaijan has initiated and actively participated in the becoming of a number of strategic trans-regional transport and ICT projects, such as Baku-Tbilisi-Kars railway ring and the Baku International Sea Trade Port, Trans-Eurasian Information Superhighway, which, having transcended the national dimensions, have turned into the endeavors of regional significance. And due to advantageous geostrategic location on the east, west, and north-south, a strong transit potential, and serving as the economically efficient and shortest route for connecting Europe and Asia, Azerbaijan still continues to the inter and intra-regional trade and overall sustainable development. There are a number of ongoing projects on transnational level which enhance the expectations in further strengthening the trans-regional connectivity and sustainable transport. Baku-Tbilisi-Kars railway link, expected to be fully operational in 2017, has a strategic importance for the region and will be able to provide competitive link for the passenger and container shipping and increase the volume of multimodal transportation across Eurasia, as well as the cargo flows from Asia to Europe and vice versa. And Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, and Georgia are interested in attracting more cargo flows through Trans-Caspian International Transit Route in the near future, and therefore agreed to establish International Trans-Caspian Transport Consortium in April 2016. Trilateral summits of the presidents of Azerbaijan, Russia, and Iran held in August 2016 in Baku, aimed at further advancing the implementation of International North-South Transport Corridor project, which will contribute to strengthening the connectivity in the Asia-Pacific region. Well, energy security has been most of the focus of this seminar, and obviously, as I said, most have been said and covered, but it is an area to which Azerbaijan contributes extensively, and both positive, and I don't want to use that word negative, but Azerbaijan has really been the promoter and the brake of regional cooperation when it comes to energy security. As a prominent producer of oil and gas, Azerbaijan is contributing to pan-European energy security through a number of trans-regional energy projects, and Southern Gas Corridor has been extensively again spoken about, and all the details have been laid out, so I will really refrain from going into much details about that. But again, Azerbaijan's role as a central hub of energy and transportation projects that will doubtlessly put the region of South Caucasus on the limelight. And it's really, really interesting to see how the country, which has again been torn by the conflicts and has been under despair in the beginning of the 90s, has really evolved into the hub and the engine of the cooperation in the region. And it has, again, evolved from mere provider of raw energy materials to international markets to the guarantor of energy security. And when you look into the closest history, when the conflict of interest happened in Georgia, between Georgia and Russia, and the way Azerbaijan reacted to it, and how Azerbaijan has really been so standing in making the point, even towards bigger neighbors, and protecting its position and the viewpoint, it really shows to what extent Azerbaijan really attaches the importance of the issue of energy security, which has become the issue of national interest, in fact, as well as defining this, some sort of identity of Azerbaijan in this particular area. So, however, the existing security challenges in the region, especially the continuing occupation of Azerbaijani territories for over 2 decades, makes the all-inclusive regional cooperation all the more elusive. So look at the regional cooperation patterns. We have Georgia, we have Turkey, which are the natural allies for Azerbaijan to cooperate, while Armenia is left really out of the cooperation patterns. And it's mostly because of Azerbaijan's tough position to keep it so until the territories are liberated. So the reality has been the enduring picture. Of South Caucasus for over a decade, and is not likely to change unless the pendulum in conflict resolution realm shifts towards more cooperative versus conflictual patterns. Unless there is really comprehensive peace between the two countries, there will not be all-round regional cooperation as such in the South Caucasus, be it energy security, be it whatever. As I said, with Russia and Iran, the nature of strategic relations are much different, and the two are carefully hedged by Azerbaijan when it concerns the issues of important security interests, and energy security being one of them. And without focusing on the geopolitics of energy security as such, one can conclude that Azerbaijan has been both an engine, as I said, and a brake of the comprehensive regional cooperation in South Caucasus in regard to the energy security and infrastructure projects. So, with fluctuating oil prices and having an export-oriented economy, Azerbaijan has been obliged to rethink its policies recently and, in long-term perspective, to reduce the country's dependence from oil exports. Many reforms of the last year and this year have indicated a genuine desire to think beyond oil area and increase the country's standing independently from root energy exports. This is a moving target, and yet the process to bring the results. However, for one, irrespective of what happens to oil prices and what the so-called post-oil period will bring, Azerbaijan has pronounced itself as a serious player in the international arena with the capacity, if not dictating the rules, still influencing, changing, and introducing them when it comes to South Caucasus. And that what really makes Azerbaijan's role both historical and significant. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Jafarova. So we had a very interesting national perspective on geopolitics of not only energy but also transportation routes and the importance of building infrastructure in the region. If you have any questions specifically for this presentation before Ms. Jafarova leaves, please address now. If not, then we thank Ms. Jafarova again and wish you a good trip and move to the last speaker, Mr. Patrick Larkin, Senior Advisor on Energy for Energy Charter Secretariat. Yeah, if a very interesting presentation for me, at least, very well relevance and potential of the Energy Charter Treaty for South Caucasus. Thank you, and please, you have a floor.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. In fact, I had some slides prepared, but to help the time management, I'll just speak from here, and I'll make things quite succinct. And there are 2 points I want to make today. I want to outline the relevance and potential of the Energy Charter for the South Caucasus, for Armenia, Azerbaijan and Georgia, because the Energy Charter is an example of a means of energy cooperation that has existed in this region for over 20 years. And I'm quite fond of saying at events like this that in this context there's no need to reinvent the wheel. The Energy Charter is something that has existed in this area and I think has contributed much to the energy security of the region. And secondly, I will discuss some of the problems that may arise in the region, of the fault lines that may develop between different economic spheres. And again, in doing so, I will go back to the relevance of the Energy Charter Treaty. Now, the most important thing about the Energy Charter is that it is a treaty. It's a treaty of 1994, and it's Armenia, Azerbaijan and Georgia are all contracting parties. And it's therefore part of the legal system, the energy legal system of each of these countries. Now, the Energy Charter Treaty is one that seeks to promote and protect investments in the energy sector. It provides a legal framework for energy trade and transit and a protocol on energy efficiency. Now, there are 5 main areas of the treaty that I would emphasize. One is the protection and promotion of foreign energy investments based on the extension of national treatment or most favoured nation treatment, whichever is the most favourable. Secondly, the treaty provides for free trade in energy materials, products and energy-related equipment based on World Trade Organization rules. Thirdly, the Energy Charter Treaty provides for energy transit through pipelines and grids. Then there's the 4th provision is reducing the negative environmental aspect of the energy cycle through improving energy efficiency. And then very importantly, and I suppose somewhat controversially these days, there's a mechanism for the resolution of state-to-state disputes and investor-state disputes. I think the very existence of the treaty's dispute settlement procedures is of considerable value in confidence-building terms, because the fact that such procedures are available and that the treaty's contracting parties have taken an unconditional obligation to accept their application means that investors, foreign investors, have confidence. Now, over the last few days, there's been a lot of discussion about the Southern Corridor, and I just emphasise that all the countries on the Southern Corridor, and that includes, of course, as I keep saying, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, but also Turkey. All of these are contracting parties to the Energy Charter Treaty. Also relevance, the three states of the Baltics, Lithuania, Estonia and Latvia, because all the countries of the European Union, and in simple terms, all the countries of the former Soviet Union are in some way involved with the Energy Charter Treaty. Now, because of the strategic position of the South Caucasus, each of these countries is an important and active member of the Energy Charter constituency. Georgia, in fact, was the first country to ratify the treaty and did so in 1995. Azerbaijan did so in December 1997 and Armenia in January 1998. Furthermore, Georgia held the chairmanship of the conference in 2015, and exactly 1 year ago, the annual meeting of the Energy Charter Conference was held here in Tbilisi. But each of these countries has faced the challenge of adjusting their national and regional policies to the requirements of the treaty. But since Azerbaijan and Georgia's first involvement with the Energy Charter Treaty, they have proved to be reliable transit partners for transporting Caspian energy resources to market. Now, where one can point to the great successes and developments in the energy sector of these three South Caucasian countries, much more investment will be needed in the coming decades, particularly when considering the implications of the investment requirements of the COP21. None of these investments can be achieved without mobilising private investors and capital. And this therefore represents an opportunity for a region as important as the South Caucasus, with its striking potential in areas such as hydropower and gas, and its critical location at a crossroads. Now, as I've mentioned, there are important provisions in the treaty on transit. Indeed, the relevance of the Energy Charter Treaty for this region was shown during the negotiations on the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline. Now, those BTC agreements refer to the Energy Charter Treaty and its rules for a level playing field. And the treaty requires that those rules should be observed by all participating governments. Under the treaty, the contracting parties are obliged to allow transit of energy consistent with the principles of freedom of transit. Countries should include the transit of energy no less favourably than energy originating in or destined for their own markets. Now, there is a concern that some critical fault lines in energy relations are developing in this region. The European Union has recently put forward its proposals for an energy union, but to the east, the Eurasian Economic Forum, or Union, is taking shape. And the participating states there include Armenia, also Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan, and the Russian Federation. Each of these states is in some way engaged with the Energy Charter process. They may have diverging and different interests, but it is clear that some shape of a common energy market will emerge within this Eurasian Economic Union. It's difficult to predict what this new structure will be. It may deepen the fragmentation of energy markets in Europe and Asia, or on the contrary, it may be a catalyst for new opportunities for cooperation and market integration. On the other side then, we have Georgia, which is a candidate for the accession to the energy community, and so has been linked to the energy union of the European Union. As I say, Armenia is looking in the other direction. So in a sense, there is a pull between Brussels on the one side and Moscow on the other. There's also then, of course, the development of the Silk Road, the economic belt. And that's why I say in this region there is a danger of fault lines developing. And the fragmentation of energy markets in the Eurasian continent is something that should be avoided. But that precisely brings me back to the Energy Charter, and that is its potential. As I've said, all of these countries are members of the Energy Charter Treaty, but so also are Turkey and Ukraine. Now, as part of the modernisation of the Energy Charter, last year in The Hague, a new political declaration was signed. It's the International Energy Charter. So what the International Energy Charter does, it's a new political declaration, and it reaffirms the principles of the Energy Charter Treaty. It's a way of moving the Energy Charter from its original Eurasian context into a more global organisation. And what's interesting is China was one of the countries who has signed this new political declaration. And there are also countries from Africa and from Americas. And last week in Tokyo, this new declaration was signed by each of Iraq and Iran. So the International Energy Charter can be used by the countries of the Caucasus to ensure cooperation at a working level. My point is that, again, just to emphasise it, this is something that exists here, that has worked well for 20 years, that is being modernised, that each of the countries of this region are involved in, and it needs political will to make it succeed, and that's something that I urge from this workshop. So I hope those remarks have helped you and, as I've said, reminded you of the relevance and potential of the Energy Charter Treaty.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Very interesting presentation, and very good to hear about the potential, I would say even some unused potential of this charter. Please, if you have any questions to address our last speaker. And to previous speaker, sorry, to Ms. Liana Gervalizia, we missed. Before starting to answer this, please, sir.
To you, madam. In your slide, you mentioned like 75% increase of gas in the European market coming the next 20 years or so, if I remember correctly.
Up to 25, it's International Energy Agency forecast.
Okay, because it's a quite optimistic approach, isn't it? Or
Well, I trust the International Energy Agency. The calculation they made under certain circumstances. Since then, of course, situation has changed, but I don't see a new forecast. Therefore, I will just refer to the one which is already published. Thank you.
just one remark, because I'm coming from Brussels. I'm not part of it, but I listened to this current negotiation of Commission with the Member States, the Council, the Parliament, about the implementation of all this reduction of any fossil energy in the European market. And there is a quite, rare occasion in the European market that there's a completely agreement among all member states in Europe that this is the right direction, and the only disagreement is about the amount of, it varies between 30 and 40% of decrease in the next 10 to 15 years, or 2030, I think, yeah. So, and there's a significant amount of German money mainly, which is currently invested together with Scandinavian money, mainly Norway, in alternative energy storage, so in battery capacity and this kind of thing. So, if you talk to universities involved in this technology, they think in the next 3 years there's milestones to be expected in terms of capacities to store energy, which makes all fossil energies in Europe very likely to diminish its role on a strategic level. So I don't know how you see that.
These discussions, of course, I have read about these discussions, but I was in London just a month ago, and there was a conference where major companies have been represented, and their expectations based on BP statistical review of world energy is that gas will take, if now the split is of gas and oil on the international market, 60 taken by oil and 40 by gas, with clean energy development, gas will take 20% of oil share in the market. On the European side, of course, if there is a breakthrough on the battery side, but it's just on a lab level, as far as I know. Sorry?
I mean, if you focus on Georgia's strategic interest as a transit hub, why don't you focus also to the eastern community? I mean,
On renewables?
like India, China.
Why not? We have a wind farm.
Yeah.
Just recently put into operation. We have a pilot project of wind farm, and we have, of course, plans to develop further grid-connected or off-grid solar energy. But this is expensive for Georgia. It is not expensive for Germany. But in London, there was a figure, very interesting figure, brought by a German person who is well informed, and he said that in northern Germany, capacity utilization of photovoltaic is just 10%. I don't know. I have no way to verify this information. But renewables, even in California, capacity utilization of renewables, although the capacity is there, because hydrocarbons have become competitive because of collapse of the price. They have become so competitive with renewables that preference is given to gas. And expectations are that the use of gas will increase with time. I don't know. We need to see what happens in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Roberts, you want to contribute?
Just a brief comment on the whole question of gas. The answer, I think, is we don't know, because we don't really know what is going to happen with regard to carbon taxes in Europe. And if you look, you have two completely contrasting examples. You have the United Kingdom, which has set a floor price on carbon, with the result that its regulated policy of getting rid of coal will be to the benefit of gas. On the other hand, you have Germany, which is following a policy of very large investment, indeed subsidized investment in renewables, but which is doing nothing at a federal level on carbon, other than what is required under the EU, with the result that its backup for renewables is coal. And coal, if anything, is increasing its market share in Germany, which is completely paradoxical, resulting in greater carbon emissions than expected, and indeed close to record levels at the moment. So there is no clarity whatsoever. The gas industry as such appears to be very much on the defensive, and the only question is whether or not the European Union will eventually bite the bullet and start insisting that Europe as a whole adopt some form of direct carbon tax rather than relying on an emissions trading system. And the omens on that are not very good.
Thank you so much for your comment. Let's switch now to answers to the previous questions, and maybe we'll, if there are any new questions, you can raise, please. So, Mr. Bakhtiar Aslanbeli, you had one question, I remember?
I got one question from the colleague regarding the use by Russia, using by Russia the air forces of Azerbaijan for some Syrian military activities. Yes, there are media reports on that. As I'm not representing, the question was what about the government's position on that?
The implication of the Russian Azerbaijani, the implications of the Russian Azerbaijani cooperation, example Syria conflict, when it comes to independence from Russia on the energy market.
Yep.
So there's some diverting positions, let's put it like that.
So I see those things a bit separated, to be honest. So the cooperation with Russia on energy matters, it could be, if you look for the last 5 to 7 years, we used to export gas to Russia, we used to import gas from Russia, depending on appetite, demand, and the circumstances. In terms of the cooperation on energy security or protection of energy infrastructure, we have close to zero type of the relationship or cooperation with Russia. In terms of the wider cooperation with Russia, Russia is the biggest neighbor you can't ignore, and you have to cooperate, you have to deal, you have to acknowledge, especially if you have a Euro-Atlantic aspiration as a whole but your Atlantic goal is too far, and they talk more for the last few years than act more. So you need to actually do certain discounts in your relationship to Russia. And that's it. And in terms of the military activities in Syria and the usage of, I don't think any of the regional countries has an option here, to be honest, of somehow saying no or somehow putting in a condition. It happens, and it's one of those leveraging of parties, leveraging type of the actions that the regional small countries are doing. And I also would like to just, I don't know whether that answers your question or not, I hope it is. And also regarding the 4.5, it isn't actually an actual proposal to amend the Washington Treaty. It's just the easiest way to describe the format I'm proposing, basically, just to, in a more academic language, the proposal is about moving from one size to all type of the partnership arrangements within the partnership of peace to more tailored, individual approach-based, individual partnership agreement, individual security arrangements with some of the PFP countries, partner countries, who has actually, I believe, a higher level of importance from the protection of critical energy infrastructure point of view. So the idea is actually to move into the new stage of that relationship in that term.
Exactly. This is actually PFP tools offer a big opportunity, to cooperate on different areas, and since critical infrastructure protection energy security becomes one of the topics of NATO agenda for the last, 3-4 summits already. So it is a way to go. Ms. Gervais, you wanted to add something, please?
Yes, thank you. Regarding energy cooperation between the companies, Azerbaijan and Russian companies, I have nothing against. If Russian gas, if Lukoil discovers gas in the offshore Caspian Korchagin field, which is the same blend light oil as Azerbaijani light oil, and if this oil is transported across BTC and it increases the load because BTC is not loaded at full capacity, I have nothing against, because why I should object to that cooperation if American companies engaged in the oil production in Kazakhstan, Tengiz-Chevroil, and recently in Kashagan, they opt to transport their oil through the port of Novorossiysk, and they cooperate quite well. And they do not opt for the development of cross-Caspian transportation network. John, correct me if I'm wrong. There is nothing going on cross-Caspian transportation network. No oil is being transported across the Caspian, although there is cross-Caspian transportation network company where Georgian Railway is a partner, together with Azerbaijani Railway. Nothing is happening, no loads on the railway. So if those US companies cooperate with Russian companies and they use the Russian transportation network instead of using geopolitical option of cross-Caspian and using the railway, etc. So why we should be against of Lukoil light oil from Korchagin? Expectations are that the Korchagin may contain some light oil being transported across BTC. It doesn't change any geopolitical, paradigm, in my understanding. Thank you.
The implication I asked was less economically. It was more on a security level, because it's cutting off your own branch, what Azerbaijan did, because Azerbaijan allowed Russia's successful bombing of IS in Syria, which is now following an exile of Syrian Daesh to Turkey, which directly will attack the pipeline. Russia doesn't want to exist, but it will cost money for Azerbaijan taxing. This is just crazy. Don't get me wrong on the economics. It's security policy.
Well, again, US and Russia are on different sides in proxy war in Syria and Iraq. but still companies cooperate. I mean, I have no intelligence information. I have no access to such an information. I'm an energy expert, and I have a look at these developments from the energy side, and I look at what's going on in Kazakhstan and in competitive routes, how the companies act. Western companies act, not only American, but also European companies act, how they act in Kazakhstan.
Thank you. I really think it's a commercial decision, not political in this. Please, Mr. Roberts.
It's both commercial and political, as are most of these big issues. And working out what the proportion is a nightmare. There is some cross-Caspian traffic that goes from Kazakhstan into the BTC. I can't remember what the figure is at the moment. I think it's between 100 and 150,000 barrels a day. And it includes oil, of course, from Turkmenistan as well as Kazakhstan. It is a political nightmare to work out what is the Azerbaijani-Russian energy relationship. Lukoil is a partner in major Azerbaijani projects, and it certainly makes sense for Lukoil, should it discover significant quantities of oil, to consider BTC on commercial grounds, and it operates in many ways as a commercial company, plus the fact that Azerbaijan and Russia are showing increasing interest in all kinds of security matters, that therefore I don't see the Russian state having any particular objection to Lukoil using BTC. And indeed, when you look at the incredibly complex BP relationship with Russia, here you have BP with its biggest single set of foreign investments in Azerbaijan, but it also has massive stakes in Russia. How does it square those? And the answer is increasingly, it looks as if there isn't a problem in squaring those issues, which has to mean that there is something that is fairly reasonable in terms of Russian-Azerbaijani relations. So I don't think there's an inherent security problem in that. Whether, of course, that acts as a stabilizer for Georgia, given the flows of oil and gas that go through Georgia, that's a different question. But it's not easy, particularly if you work out that all this happened when, in fact, U.S. corporate relations with Russia over transit of oil through the Caspian Pipeline Consortium's line from Atyrau to Novorossiysk are usually pretty awful.
Thank you so much for your comment. Let's move to next questions. Next speaker, actually, Mr. Dr. Chesnakas. You had one or two questions, if I remember. Please.
I have two questions. One in regarding what South Caucasus region could learn, basically, or what are pitfalls in possible cooperation. Basically, if we look into various indexes and information provided by international institutions, we see that these countries still have to deal a lot with the corruption, with the efficiency of institutions, implementation of projects, and we see that they have quite good cooperation with one another, but at the same time, being here, I want to encourage to let's say, think in a broader context, what is happening in energy sector in the world, because energy sector is changing very rapidly today, and there are plans to change even more rapidly tomorrow. And I think in order to have efficient policies, you have to address them. And the second question is on the LNG terminal and in Baltics and here. So basically, Baltics being consumers, it is only natural that the LNG terminal adds to the let's say expenses on maintenance of terminals, additional infrastructure. However, it allows to diversify, it allows to increase our negotiation positions, it allows to decrease price of gas, and even the private companies are starting to import gas via LNG terminal, not from Russia. And on this side, I think the core question is economic efficiency of terminals, how efficiently they can operate. We can talk about strategic projects. However, energy companies are interested in business, in income, and this is the core driver for their investments. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Please, sir, you want to add?
Well, I'm Arūnas Molis, also from Lithuania. Maybe also just adding few things on the LNG terminal. So I fully agree with what my colleague told, but maybe also to add some few remarks actually on the positive sides of the LNG terminal, which is now in operation for more than 1 year. The key feature, the key thing is, well, the price, of course, but the key thing is the prerequisite for a common market. What the Baltic states are trying to do now together with Finland is to have a common regional market. And without this additional supply possibility to have this functioning common market, then the consumers of the natural gas, for instance in Estonia, would be able to buy the gas in Lithuania, and the gas would be delivered to Estonia, and other way around wouldn't be possible without the second supply option. Actually, so now this creation of this system with virtual trading point, with common rules, the so-called code of conduct, and all other things wouldn't be possible without the second supply option. And the LNG terminal provides that. So this is a key thing actually, to have a common market, which of course will affect the price, which of course will affect the flexibility of supply, and many other things. So this is one issue. The second issue, actually, what we see from the trader of the LNG and what we see from the Klaipėdos Nafta's experience, which is managing basically the terminal. The key business for them is not to trade the gas now. The key business for them today is to trade the know-how. And the Klaipėdos Nafta today starts to participate in other LNG terminal projects around the world, be it in Europe, be it in the South America countries, or be it somewhere else in Asia. So what we see actually that currently with LNG terminal in Klaipėda, we have an experience nobody has in our region, and this is actually what we can sell, what we can export, not the gas, but the knowledge. And this also becomes quite a perspective thing. Maybe a smaller issue, but also what we have with LNG is a very different type of contract. Usually what we had with Gazprom was long-term contracts. What we have since this year with Gazprom is not the long-term contract, but the auctions. With LNG trading, we have the prices which are attached to the NBP index, the prices which might be attached to TTF index in the Netherlands. So it's a completely different thing, and it's less dependence on the price of oil, which is always the case when you trade with Gazprom. So here also is an opportunity to have more flexibility. Not even talking that what Klaipėdos Nafta currently does is expanding the cooperation with universities. So we're trying basically to not only to get the experience we get from the current crew of independent ship, but we're trying to grow our own experts, and we try to develop these kind of educational projects at Klaipėda universities, for instance. So there are these many kind of additional business and education and innovation opportunities which comes with LNG terminal being placed in Lithuania. And well, this is a paradoxical thing, but what we saw in Lithuania, that the consumption of the natural gas was falling, and quite considerably. In few years the consumption has fallen by 30% and even more. But what is expected with LNG terminal, that the consumption of natural gas might be increasing. Maybe not necessarily in Lithuania, but in the region, that's for sure. Because when you have LNG, you have a different delivery options. You can deliver it not only through pipeline, And the pipeline system, although being quite well developed, it doesn't reach all the consumers. So the LNG can be transported to the consumer by trucks, maybe by rail if you want. So there will be a potential for the new consumers, as in the case in Estonia, which is having a lot of ferries and going to Finland, which might be the engines being replaced from oil products to the natural gas. So this is the potential. This is the potential. Price and diversification, of course, at the core, but many other small things which actually also completely change the landscape of the natural gas and the acceptance of the natural gas in our regions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. My conclusion is just briefly that you have enough grounds for a new project, exchange of experience between Baltics and Black Sea countries. You want to add on this point, please? And afterward you switch to the last questions and we finish. Thank you.
Yeah. That's exactly a point here. We are in Georgia and we are looking for examples and LNG in Baltics and how it reciprocates here. Now, actually, that's something probably which, especially as we are in Georgia and we are talking about the region surrounding, it's worthwhile to focus what was the issue of LNG which was proposed in Georgia and what was the effect of this. Now, we know that there was a lot of people unhappy with South Stream and Nord Stream, and they've been using the argument that, well, this is bad because it's expensive. Now, this has not hurt a lot. Turkish Stream is going on, Nord Stream is going on, but what it hurt is the only realistic route from Turkmenistan and Turkmengas. Now, if there is no Turkmengas in Europe, this means that there is much more capable monopoly of Russian gas, assuming what many people believe is that LNG will not be able to compete with Russian gas, and by eliminating the only gas which can compete with Russian gas, which is Turkmen gas, we are allowing the situation to continue further in a way. Germany will have no incentive to apply carbon tax and substitute coal with gas, because no point to further incentivize Russian import in Europe, and that's all things are interlinked. Now, when there was Mr. Chow made a very publicly Chow, if you have heard about Black Sea LNG at Atlantic Council, he said, I'm trying to persuade Romanian government to stop talking about this because it actually kills other realistic projects when you are kind of emphasize the importance and government supports to something which is a pure fantasy, you are affecting negatively something which has a realistic basis. And then what's the implication? Implication is that Mr. Joe Roberts, for example, calculates the LNG cost, adds it to the other costs, and compares it with Turkish route, and then comes to the conclusion, gentlemen, maybe it's a brilliant idea to have Turkmen gas in Europe, but it's simply commercially it's not attainable. Okay, that's true if you take LNG in account. That's true if you take Turkish route, which implies that several dozens of billions has to spend to infrastructure in Balkans, which is a difficult thing, which can never be done. Even Nabucco could not get through. But we have a ready system, which is half empty from Romania to Baumgarten, which just can be used without any single dollar of additional investment. This was floated by Brendan Devlin 10 years ago in Washington, and at that time there was a lot of opposition to this. What we really need for investments is to trigger Trans-Caspian is to first clear up the situation with the Black Sea. We need to have an environmental impact assessment approved and have a Black Sea route cleared for Turkmen gas. Then the issue of crossing Caspian will be much easier.
Okay, thank you so much.
And that's where we need probably to focus, because there is nothing more important, or there's nothing else which can affect the energy security of the region and how the region can be helpful to Europe than this issue. Oil is kind of freely traded in the world. Now, gas is the only strategic thing. And it's a good idea.
Thank you so much. I think we'll switch slightly to the next panel, regional cooperation. Sorry, Mr. Roberts, for taking but we missed. We are missing coffee, so you should move for coffee. Just for
So
2 words, final remark.
Yeah, there was a question about what I would propose for Georgia's energy security as first. So I will avoid the temptation to talk about separate towers versus the whole castle. I would say that we need to think about whole castle.
Thank you. Let's thank all the speakers, and let's move to coffee and the next panel in 10 minutes.